Welcome back, Deep Divers. Today we're going to be jumping into some really fascinating concepts. Postcolonialism, and then Asian values.
Ooh,
And these are not just like interesting theoretical things. They really get to the heart of how we understand international relations. So I think it's going to be particularly helpful for those of you out there prepping for the UPSC exams.
absolutely.
But even beyond that, just for understanding the world around us,
Yeah.
these are ideas that have shaped so much of recent history and continue to shape the world that we're living in today.
Yeah, I think it's really remarkable how after World War II, we saw the decline of these Western empires, but it wasn't necessarily the decline of Western thought, right? It's
Yeah.
like even as nations fought for their independence, they were still grappling with this legacy of colonialism, this sort of ghost of colonialism.
Such a good point. We tend to focus on the political changes, the independence movements, the, transfer of power, but you're highlighting this deeper cultural and ideological layer.
Hmm.
That's where post-colonialism comes in, isn't it? It's about giving a voice to those experiences and perspectives that were often silenced or marginalized during the colonial period.
Exactly. It's about analyzing and understanding the lasting impacts of colonialism, both on the colonizers and the colonized, and giving a platform to those whose stories and perspectives were often overshadowed.
Right, so it's not just about political independence.
No,
It's about cultural and intellectual independence as well.
absolutely. Take, for example, the non-aligned movement. The Bandung Conference in 1955 was a pivotal moment when countries like India, Indonesia, Egypt said, we're not going to be pawns in this Cold War game. We're going to forge our own path. We're seeking a third way.
It was a bold statement,
Yeah.
a real declaration of independence. And it wasn't just about refusing to take sides in that particular conflict. It was about asserting their right to define their own futures on their own terms.
Exactly. And this drive for independent thought manifested in different ways. Think about Gandhi's nonviolent resistance rooted in Hindu principles, a very different approach from, say, Frantz Fanon, who argued that violence was sometimes necessary to break free from colonial oppression.
Right. So we see these contrasting approaches within post-colonial thought. It's not a monolithic movement, but a rich tapestry of perspectives and ideas.
Exactly.
But doesn't this sometimes lead to kind of an overcorrection? Some critics argue that rejecting Western thought entirely throws the baby out with the bathwater. Right.
That's a key criticism. How do you learn from Western thought while also critiquing its colonial legacies? Where's the line? How do you balance that?
Right. These are tough questions. And this leads to another important debate. How do we reconcile cultural rights with individual rights, particularly when it comes to women's rights in post-colonial societies?
Absolutely. That's a huge question.
I mean, these are some of the core challenges that post-colonial thinkers are grappling with. And I think for those of you preparing for the UPSC, it's important to note that post-colonialism isn't about simple answers. It's about understanding these complexities, the nuances of different perspectives, and analyzing their implications.
You got it. It's about developing that critical lens to understand how the past continues to shape global politics, international relations, even our own personal lives.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And speaking of challenging Western dominance,
Mm.
let's shift gears a bit to another fascinating concept, Asian values. This idea gained traction in the late 20th century,
Yeah.
right? Almost as a counter-narrative to the dominant Western models of development and governance.
Yeah, precisely. As Japan's economy soared and the so-called tiger economies, roared to life, people started pointing to Asian culture as the key to their success. It's almost like this idea that there's something unique about Asian culture that fosters economic growth and social stability.
Right, so this idea of Asian values emerged as a distinct set of principles that supposedly explained this success. So let's unpack this a bit.
Yeah.
What exactly are these Asian values? What makes them different from, say, Western values?
Well, proponents of this idea often emphasize community over individual duty, over rights and social harmony as the foundation for progress. So it's a model that prioritizes collective good and deference to authority, contrasting with the individualistic, rights-focused ethos we often associate with Western liberalism.
So in essence, it's a different vision of how society should be organized and what values should be prioritized.
Right.
And this wasn't just an abstract philosophical debate.
Yeah.
There were real political implications.
Well, absolutely.
Yeah.
Think about the Bangkok Declaration of 1993 when Asian nations came together and said, human rights need to be understood within our specific cultural context. It was a direct challenge to this idea of universal human rights championed by the West.
It was a bold statement.
Yeah.
And it had some very powerful proponents.
Oh, yeah.
Leaders like Mahathir Mohamad of Malaysia and Lee Kuan Yew of Singapore
Yeah.
were strong advocates for this view.
Absolutely. They use their own country's economic success as evidence that this model could deliver both prosperity and stability.
Right. It was almost like a counter-argument to the Western model of development.
Yeah.
But of course, this wasn't the end of the story.
Not at all. The narrative around Asian values definitely took a hit with that 1997-98 Asian financial crisis.
Yeah.
You know, suddenly those values that had been touted as strengths were now being blamed for this economic instability.
Right. It's like the model wasn't as infallible as some had claimed.
Exactly. Critics argued that practices like cronyism and a lack of transparency, which some attributed to this emphasis on relationships and harmony, actually contributed to the meltdown.
So did the concept of Asian values just fade away after that?
Not entirely. You know, while the crisis did dampen some of that enthusiasm, the idea never really went away.
Okay.
In fact, we've seen a resurgence of these ideas in the 21st century, particularly tied to the rise of China.
Right. So it seems like China's success has kind of reignited this debate about alternative models of development.
Absolutely. And I've noticed how Confucianism is often brought into the conversation.
Yeah. And I've noticed that too.
You know, with its emphasis on things like social harmony, filial piety, respect for authority, it's almost like some are using Confucianism to kind of explain China's economic and political ascendance.
It's fascinating how these ancient philosophies are being invoked to explain contemporary events. But doesn't this raise some concerns about essentializing entire cultures? I mean, can we really talk about a singular Asian civilization when Asia is so diverse?
That's a key point.
Yeah.
The idea of a monolithic Asian civilization is really problematic.
Yeah.
I mean, Asia is a tapestry of cultures, religions, political systems, historical experiences. To lump it all together under this banner of Asian values risks overlooking all of that incredible complexity.
And all those unique characteristics of individual nations and societies.
All those unique characteristics of individual nations and societies.
Yeah. It's a good reminder for anyone studying international relations, particularly those gearing up for the UPSC, that these broad categories like East and West can be so misleading.
They can.
They obscure the nuances and internal contradictions within these regions.
Precisely. Even within a country like China, which is often held up as this example of Asian values, you have this complex interplay of Confucianism, Buddhism, Taoism, even Maoist thought.
Right.
It's not a simple equation.
So it seems like this concept of Asian values is more a product of political rhetoric and cultural generalization than a reflection of the actual diversity of Asian societies.
I think that's a fair assessment.
Yeah. And it leads to another set of critiques. Some argue that emphasizing Asian values can actually be a way to mask authoritarian tendencies and justify limitations on individual liberties.
Yeah, it's like saying we need to prioritize order and economic growth, even if it means sacrificing certain freedoms.
Right, which raises a whole host of ethical and political questions. But is there any merit to the idea that certain cultural values might contribute to economic success?
That's a really complex question.
Yeah.
And there are no easy answers. I think it's important to avoid those simplistic generalizations and recognize that cultural values are not static. They evolve, they adapt over time. And attributing economic success solely to cultural factors overlooks all those historical, political, and economic factors that also shape a nation's development.
So for those studying international relations, and particularly for those preparing for the UPSC, what are some of the key takeaways from this discussion on Asian values?
I think the most important thing is to approach these concepts with a critical eye.
Yeah.
Don't take them at face value. Analyze the arguments, consider different perspectives, and be aware of the potential biases and agendas that might be shaping the narrative.
It's about recognizing that international relations is not just about states interacting,
No.
but about people values, beliefs, and how those elements influence the decisions that nations make.
Exactly. And for those of you preparing for the UPSC, these concepts are likely to appear in your exams. Delving into those nuances, understanding the critiques, and being able to critically analyze these ideas will be crucial for your success.
We've covered a lot of ground today, haven't we? I mean, from post-colonialism to Asian values, it's been quite a journey.
Yeah, it really has. We've seen how these concepts challenge some of those traditional Western perspectives on global politics and development.
You know, forcing us to rethink assumptions about power, about culture, even about the very notion of civilization.
Exactly.
And I think it's important to remember that these aren't just abstract academic theories. You know, they have real-world implications, shaping international relations, policy decisions, even our understanding of global events.
Especially for those UPSC aspirants out there,
Right.
these concepts are crucial for developing that nuanced and informed perspective on global affairs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The UPSC exams aren't just about rote memorization, They want to see that you can critically analyze information, engage with complex ideas. So these ideas are bound to pop up in your exams in various forms,
Yeah.
from essay questions on the legacy of colonialism
Right.
to analyzing contemporary debates about Asian values in the context of China's rise.
And remember, there's no single right answer
Right.
when it comes to these complex issues.
It's about engaging with different perspectives, weighing the evidence,
Yeah.
forming your own informed opinions.
Exactly.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a final thought-provoking question, one that has profound implications for the future of international relations.
Okay.
Is the world inevitably heading towards a clash of civilizations? Or is there hope for different value systems to coexist,
Right.
perhaps even learn from each other?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the answer is far from clear-cut. But by understanding the complexities of postcolonialism, Asian values, and those ongoing challenges to Western hegemony, we're better equipped to navigate this intricate global landscape. Right.
We can move beyond those simplistic binaries and engage in more nuanced and productive dialogues about the future we want to create.
Exactly.
And remember, this deep dive is just the starting point.
It is.
Keep exploring, keep questioning, keep pushing those intellectual boundaries.
That's right.
Because in a world that's constantly changing, a deep understanding of these concepts is not just valuable,
No,
it's essential.
Absolutely.
And if you enjoyed this exploration of postcolonialism and Asian values, be sure to like, subscribe, and share this episode with your fellow deep divers. Until next time, keep those brains buzzing.